understand, or NextGen is an interoperability company. What sort of challenges are you seeing in the connected car space?
I think the primary challenges at the moment are the diversification in terms of the number of devices that we're seeing brought into the car. We've traditionally seen Bluetooth as being one of the primary sort of conduits of connection, but now we're seeing so much more. Wi-Fi, USB connections, Android Auto and CarPlay will typically use USB as the transport, but you've also got simultaneously Wi-Fi and Bluetooth running. In the vehicle space as well, you're not looking at a single device, you're looking at embedded devices in the vehicle, and you're looking at other potentially passengers bringing in other devices as well. So you've got a multitude in terms of hardware of different layers to deal with. And then secondly, we've got the apps layer. So what we're talking about there is we're seeing an increasing prevalence in streaming services. Applications for real-time navigation, for instance, as well would come into this. And what we're seeing is increasing complexity in terms of the interoperation of all of these devices for the car user. That's disastrous for a few reasons, but the main one is in terms of distraction for the driver. The second thing is the auto industry are very interested in the annual customer satisfaction surveys. J.D. Power's year on year highlight connectivity in the vehicle as the #1 cause of complaint for consumers. So what NextGen are about is helping to firstly analyze some of those conditions to understand the typical usage patterns that a user will use, typical devices they'll bring into the vehicle, typical applications they might be using, and help highlight any issues that might be there, and where possible we can feed that back to the manufacturers in order to allow them to to address some of those concerns. But over and above that, there's a second layer of issue to address, and that is again in the complexity. And because of the layers of complexity that are there, it is difficult manually for anybody to actually test that. And we do. We go around the world, we test every mobile device pretty much that's launched on the market every quarter. But what is difficult to do is to model reliably and repeatably, manually, all of these test cases or all the possibilities of interaction that can go on. And so what NextGen are now doing is we've developed an automated test system, it's called ATAM, that allows for very complex scenarios to be modeled. That's important because you need to be able to repeat things in exactly the same way. And we can typically do things like, how does the vehicle HMI react as you transition from music streaming to a voice call, as you switch the engine on and off, as you approach the vehicle, as you leave the vehicle. All of these scenarios have quite complex interactions that are actually going on behind that. ATAM, our automated solution, is able to model those, controlling remotely the handsets and the in-car systems, and giving a really in-depth picture of interoperability, not just in the case of a few hours, but potentially for days. These systems will run and test 1,000 or 10,000 pairing and disconnections and reconnections of a device, and highlight a boundary condition, something that happens only once in a while, but which obviously could still cause concern for a consumer when it's encountered. So ATAM is a groundbreaking system for NextGen because we're able now to really exercise the system and understand the system in a way that had been impossible to do before.
It sounds like a veritable hornet's nest of connectivity requiring expertise in software, hardware, automotive solutions. It's hard to imagine how a manufacturer would cope without something such as the ATAM solution you're talking about here.
Yeah, I think that's the case. I mean, indeed, this kind of testing of all of those technologies has and is taking place, but it tends to be happening in silos. So you've got one team that are responsible for the Bluetooth connectivity, another team for Wi-Fi, another team for apps, another team for remote access. And what NextGen are able to do is is to bring all of those technologies together and understand how they all interoperate rather than just individual parts of the pattern.
Certainly in terms of the handsets, you've got to be able to provide global coverage, because we're talking about global manufacturers as well here, aren't you?
That's true. Obviously there are global devices. The Apple iPhones come to mind. Flagship Android devices you tend to see globally, but there are a lot of regionalized devices. People don't realize how diverse the Chinese market is, for example, or the Indian market, or some of the other Asian markets where devices and manufacturers exist that don't exist elsewhere. Other things that are interesting about differences in global markets are not just down to hardware, but also in terms of ecosystems and apps, because again, in China, Google's blocked, so you can't have Android Auto in your car, you can't have the Google search systems and cloud services. So devices work differently in different markets. So yeah, NextGen have a global footprint which allows us to test in all of those different markets, not only with the hardware technologies, but also the ecosystems that surround them.
Well, the car is a node of the Internet of Things. How will that affect the future of interoperability, do you think?
Well, that's a great question. In terms of the Internet of Things, what we're seeing is certainly in terms of how that's evolving into the car space. The car is rightly considered to be a centralized node, as you say, but a lot of the manifestation of the Internet of Things, as things exist right now, is in providing slicker ways, perhaps, to provide services that we've already got. So more integrated services. We talked about music streaming and navigation and bringing those together to add extra value. But the next evolvement of the Internet of Things for the car is in terms of extra data layers. We call it vehicle to infrastructure and vehicle to vehicle. These communication technologies add the potential for much greater service for the driver. And what we're talking about there is, for example, traffic management systems. Safety is a really important thing. What we're really looking at is a development of an extra layer of services, of metadata, if you like, but of communication standards that improve the driving experience for everybody. Where NextGen are interested in that is because we're here to get involved with the interoperability of all those services.
Generally, how do you see the future of the Internet of Things evolving for the connected car?
We spent a lot of time in our roundtable discussion talking about ecosystems, and increasingly we are looking at the car manufacturers buying into these ecosystems for reasons of security and for value.
Yes.
And for NextGen, we're looking not just at testing interoperability at the device-to-device level, but increasingly at the point at which these ecosystems interoperate as well. So in terms of the future of the connected car, we're seeing the extra value that can be added by the ecosystems that can be enabled consequentially by the Internet of Things.
Well, Andor, I can't see the requirement for testing and interoperability services and products like ATAM reducing anytime soon.